I set out to beat Elden Ring as a frog. My only restriction was to use the gear and abilities of the frogs. Although this was supposed to be a simple challenge run, the farther I went, the more I realized that frogs are more than background creatures. They're laced into the story, the lore, and even the world itself, far more than I expected. It all started in the homeland of the frogs, Liurnia of the Lakes. My first order of business was to get what gear I could, so I mugged a frog for his club, which I used to jump another frog for his suit of dirty chainmail, which is, as you can imagine, not very protective. After gearing up, I returned to my village only to find my people had been slaughtered, but one of the elders, Albus, was able to conceal himself long enough to entrust me with half a medallion that would allow me to reach our promised land, Miquella's Halig Tree. With his dying breath, Albus directed me to find a fellow frog woman named Latina, who knew the location of the medallion's other half. But before heading towards Miquella, I had some unfinished business in the area. For cursing my existence, I decided I had to revolt against my creators, the wizards of the Raya Lucaria Academy, headed by their queen Rennala. So I started searching the academy for Rennala, only to be abducted before I could find her. I woke to find myself in a prison town within a volcano, where more frogs had been abducted and tortured. Whether the torture was based on religious persecution or to elicit information on my medallion half, I wasn't sticking around to find out. But as I was sneaking out, I came across the burnt corpse of a frog that had been skinned. Further, his hide had been fashioned into a mask that fit perfectly. After donning my new mask, I was able to sneak out of the torture town and venture back to Raya Lucaria to revolt against my creator Rennala. I eventually made my way into the Grand Library, where I found Rennala floating around, accompanied by her 50 paraplegic children. They apparently dismissed me as no threat, thinking I was a regular frog that had wandered in. So I began sprinting around the room, clubbing the children as they threw books at me. After witnessing several of her children get flattened, Rennala finally decided to step in. But as she dropped to the ground, she apparently twisted her ankle. With Rennala now vulnerable, I tried taking her back to choke her out, but I slipped off her robe, so I just beat her with my club until she submitted. I immediately demanded to know why she cursed me to be born as a frog. Rennala explained that long ago, an underground civilization known as the Nox had created artificial life forms that were meant to become the lord of the realm. Following the methods of the Nox, the wizards of Raya Lucaria sought to create their own artificial life form to take the throne of Elden Lord. So the Academy turned to Rennala, who possessed an amber egg gifted to her by her ex-husband Radagon, which granted her the godlike power of eternal rebirth. But the cost of such rebirth was you have no leg function, are frail, and die quickly as a result. So the wizards turned to alchemy to fix these defects, artificially creating the second generation of frogs, who are very agile with fully functional legs but can't talk. Although they proved useful as mute servants, the wizards continued their experimentation until they created me with all the agility of my brother frogs while maintaining my ability to speak. As their perfected creation, my purpose was to become the consort of Rennala's daughter, acting as the Elden Lord to usher in a new age. So Rennala directed me to seek her demigod daughter Ranni for the next step in becoming the Elden Lord. I was skeptical, but I put my club away and headed for Ranni, figuring I should at least hear her plans.
I am the witch Ranni. I stole death long ago. Wilt thou enter into my service?
So I agreed to fulfill my purpose and consort with Ranni. But to consort with Ranni, she said I would have to prove I was more than just a frog with a big club by fighting her brother Donnie in mutual combat. Ranni explained that her brother used to be a fearsome general, the embodiment of war itself, but after the accident, he was never the same. Apparently, he got into a fight with their half-sister Malenia, who inflicted him with brain rot, and was still stationed on the same battlefield to this day, endlessly slaughtering people and feasting on their corpses. So I headed towards Ranni's brother, journeying through a war-torn landscape to meet Donnie for our fight. Upon my arrival, I noticed he was riding around a horse the size of his shin. I felt bad for his horse, so I dismounted and started chugging steroids to challenge him on foot. But Donnie No-Toes didn't feel the same and springboarded off his horse, burying it underground as he started swinging on me. Luckily, my frog body was too short for him to accurately aim at, and while he grew increasingly frustrated, I kept clubbing his rotting shins until he lost his balance. So I cracked him in the forehead while he was down and moved in to continue clubbing his shins, causing him to fly off using gravity magic he had long ago learned from a frog. As the sky turned dark, Donnie came flying back in on his horse as a ball of fire, crashing into the ground. Expectedly, it took a minute for his horse to get its bearings, so I rushed in to club Donnie and his horse in the backs of their legs before they could recover. As Donnie fell, it was as if the stars had resumed moving, and one of those stars appeared to land in the nearby woods. So I made my way over to the crash site, finding a giant crater which had opened a path to an ancient underground city of the Nox. After navigating my way past the prototypes that led to my creation, I eventually found a treasure chest which contained an important-looking sword. So I pocketed the treasure and returned to Ranni for the next step in becoming her consort. Ranni was pleased I had returned with the sword in hand, trading me for a statue that would allow me to go see her dead body.
A strange gift, perhaps. But a rare sort such as thee would welcome it, I'm sure.
With that, Ranni thanked me for my service, bidding me farewell to depart on a dark path that only she may tread. So I followed Ranni to tread the path with her, which led me into an underground river where Ranni had turned herself into a miniature doll. Although Ranni wasn't happy that I had trailed her, she said I could make it up to her by fighting our way to a moonlit church she needed to reach. On the way, Ranni explained that she was more than a mere demigod, she's an Empyrean. Ranni went on to elaborate that out of all of the demigods, only her and her twin half-siblings, Melania and Miquella, held the status of an Empyrean. Long ago, the three siblings were given this special status by a cosmic force known as the Greater Will, speaking through a set of 2 fingers. As Empyreans, the 3 were candidates to become a full-fledged god who would succeed the current god of this realm, Queen Marika the Eternal. But perhaps on account of her father Radagon leaving her mother Rennala depressed and broken to marry Queen Marika, Ranni decided to defy the fate given to her by the Greater Will. To do so, Ranni had to rid herself of her Empyrean flesh. The only problem was that Marika had removed the concept of death from the world, evidently viewing eternal life as heaven on earth. As such, Marika sealed the concept of death inside the blade of a beast that's loyal to her. However, Ranni was able to steal a fragment of death to initiate what would come to be known as the Night of the Black Knives. On this night, Ranni imbued the blades of the Black Knife assassins with death itself and targeted Marika's golden child, Godwyn. This event ultimately resulted in the first recorded death of any demigod, but more specifically, the simultaneous death of Godwyn and Ranni, the firstborn heirs of Marika and Radagon. But since the deaths were simultaneous, the curse mark of true death was split, causing Godwyn to perish in soul alone, while Ranni perished in flesh alone. The death of Godwyn brought about a great war known as the Shattering, where Marika shattered the Elden Ring into shards known as Great Runes, which were inherited by her demigod offspring. Ever since then, the demigod shard-bearers have been at odds with one another, fighting to claim the power of the Elden Ring. So now, our mission was to eliminate the forces standing in our way of claiming that power for ourselves. But just as I fought off a rabid dog, Ranni tried to dismiss me again, saying she would go the rest of the way alone. Nevertheless, Ranni left me with a key to a treasure chest in her mother's possession, which contained a ring. So I pocketed the ring and returned to the path to follow Ranni once again. Except to reach Ranni, I have to trudge through a lake of rot itself. As my legs began to rot away, I considered bailing to take the easy path by just heading for the promised land, Miquella's Haligtree. But my hesitation gradually degraded into rage as I realized this environmental violation was directly beneath my lake and causing it to sink. So I powered forward, cursing anything and everyone with any relation to rot for harming my lake. Once I finally reached the other side, my reward was to climb inside a stone coffin to do a trust fall off a rotting waterfall. Nevertheless, I had faith that Ranni had accounted for me following her, and took the plunge. Sure enough, I eventually recovered, only to find myself deep underground. So I got my bearings and pressed forward, only to encounter the cosmic horror that had wiped out the Nox inside of an underground starfield. It immediately tried to grab me, but I was able to slip out of the way and start bashing it in the face with my club. It didn't like that, so it flew up in the air to try and use some magic before trying to smash me with its barbed tail. Given that I'm the size of its head, I wasn't the easiest target to hit, and moved in to repeatedly bash it in the face with my club until eventually it went down. I took the opening to shove my club into its forehead eyeball a couple times. At this point, it knew I meant business, so it opened a portal to teleport 50 feet away to get some distance. As I ran it down, it opened dimensional rifts to hurl numerous boulders at me, but I was able to roll out of the way and move in, slipping another grab attempt to land a couple more swings. By now, it started getting desperate to hit me, so it attacked the floor to try and clip me with the shockwave. I just backed up, which caused it to panic and try to shoot me with a laser beam. After it whiffed its shot, it resorted to biting, but couldn't get a solid grip on my frog body. Now it was just trying anything, throwing some exploding stardust in my general direction and trying to get a hold of me again. But it overextended, leaving it wide open to get the club treatment. With nothing left in my way, I continued along the path to ascend an elevator, which brought me to the moonlit church Ranni spoke of. Underneath the church, I found Ranni had used the blade I gave her earlier to axe the fingers that originally fated her to succeed Marika as the head of the Golden Order. Ranni explained that while she sought to bring order, she would need time to ponder the issues of the Golden Order so she could create a better world as its new god. So while Ranni sorted out the details of becoming god, she directed me to walk the path of the Lord, and once all is done, she assured me we would meet again. With that, Ranni directed me towards the capital city of Leyndell to upend Marika's Golden Order. So I made the long journey over, eventually reaching the heart of the capital, where I was confronted by an illusion of Marika's first consort and first Elden Lord, Godfrey. We greeted each other not with words, but with a test of might. Fortunately, this illusion couldn't live up to the real Godfrey, who America had long ago divested of eternal life. It was said that the real Godfrey was sent away on a journey to grow stronger in the face of death. Only after his death would America revive him back in these lands, reborn with his newfound strength to claim the Elden Ring. Regardless, this illusion was the last thing standing in my way of reaching the heart of the capital, where I could find America and claim the Elden Ring for Ranni. So after passing the test of might, I proceeded up to the foot of the big tree to find America. Except as I arrived, I was met by the caster of the Godfrey illusion and head of the capital city, Morgott. Although Morgott praised my ambition, he was clearly here to put a stop to us reaching America. What he didn't expect was that I would start the fight by shoulder rolling directly into his lead leg to get behind him. But before I could club him, he hit a 180 and b-hopped away and started swinging at me. But I was able to slip out of the way and jump up to club him in the chin. Right as I landed, I hit a quick shoulder roll to get behind him again. But this time, there was no hesitation, and I started swinging as he turned into me, dropping him with a brutal nut shot. While he was fighting to catch his breath, I individually cracked each nut, laying him out. As he was getting up, I smashed the top of his kneecap and then tapped his patellar tendon, knocking him off balance for a couple body shots so hard he started puking grace. I immediately got some distance to avoid the splash zone, only for him to take this opening to tell me his backstory. Morgott shared that he and his twin Mog were born the sons of God herself, Marika and Godfrey. But when Marika gave birth to them, they came out covered in horns. Marika was so torn up that she shunned them and relegated them to the deepest sewers of the capital.
I'm just a prom night dumpster baby.
The twins went on to find different truths. Mog decided being shunned for his four horns is fake and retreated deeper into the sewers. But Mog's refusal of the divine was said to light a hellfire of suffering within himself. Ever since, word around the capital was that Mog had found another god, the Mother of Truth. While Mog had turned his back on the capital to follow his truth, Morgott decided to believe in his mother Marika as God. As such, Morgott's been presiding over the capital ever since the Shattering, dampening his accursed flames. But now, faced with the flame of ambition, he decided to let his fires burn. Except I may have got a bit too ambitious and started sprinting towards him to start trading blows. Although he nearly decapitated me, I was able to survive. After healing up, I ran back in and gave him a Charlie horse so bad he whiffed his swing. While his leg was still cramping, I smashed the side of his opposite leg, taking him down for good. With Morgott out of the way, I continued up to the tree only to find access was barred by a mantle of barbs. So I tried asking Morgott for answers, who said the tree's been surrounded by impenetrable thorns ever since the Shattering. Since then, Marika has been imprisoned inside the tree by the Greater Will as punishment for shattering the Order. Further, no one, including Morgott, has been able to communicate with Marika since. But as I took a seat to think, Marika came out to greet me as the Holy Spirit. I asked why she shunned her children for their horns. Marika replied, imagine giving birth to a tumbleweed made of gravel, twice in a row. They were twins. I could sense there was something more to her story, so I asked her to tell me about her journey to godhood. So Marika gave me a stack of various items and told me she had Radagon write lore about them, but I was free to figure her story out myself. I gathered that Marika was born in a quiet shaman village where she lived peacefully with her beloved dog Malekith. But Marika had the flame of ambition inside of her, which led her to explore beyond the boundaries of her village. Nearby, she found ancient ruins inhabited by crawling hands and magic-wielding lampreys. But on the ground, the young shaman identified mushrooms resembling fingers. Naturally, Marika had questions regarding the nature of these otherworldly fingers. As if it were fate itself, there was a nearby church dedicated to worshipping these fingers. So Marika headed over, seeking answers. The church explained that the fingers came from the first falling star, and that they were the messengers of a higher power known as the Greater Will. Further, some church members had such faith in the Greater Will that they consumed the finger mushrooms to hallucinate and commune with their god. Consequently, consumption of these mushrooms partially transformed the devout followers into fingers, resulting in the lampreys that now inhabit the ruins. More interestingly, however, the church now identified Marika as a chosen one of the fingers. Here, Marika was deemed an Empyrean who had the potential of becoming a god. Guided by her flame of ambition, Marika decided to follow this path towards godhood. So the fingers directed Marika along the path of the Empyrean, pointing her towards the Hornsent. The Hornsent were the most powerful civilization at the time, appropriately named due to their deep religious belief that horns were a divine gift sent to them by a higher power. Marika gathered that the Hornsent understood this higher power as the Crucible, the origin of all life. Although the Hornsent referred to the higher power by a different name, Marika ultimately determined they were aligned towards ascending to a higher level of existence. But to become a god and attain a higher level of existence, the Greater Will demanded that Marika make the greatest sacrifice. Indeed, if Marika wanted to reach a place no one had ever been, she would have to sacrifice everything and everyone she had ever known. Thus, America devised a plan to accomplish her goals, reasoning that the ends justify the means, even if those means involve horrific sacrifice. So America seduced the Hornsent with the idea of achieving immortality. America explained to the Hornsent that her people were uniquely spiritually attuned and were even able to meld themselves harmoniously with nature. The Crucible-worshipping Hornsent recognized that these traits could be the key to controlling the cycle of life itself. So then America divulged the location of her own village so that they may be captured for experimentation. What followed were a series of gruesome rebirthing rituals where the Hornsent would butcher the shamans and stuff their flesh into jars with the flesh of criminals. They found that the flesh melded harmoniously together, so they continued the cruel and unusual practice, attempting to rebirth criminals into saints. Following the mass sacrifice of her people, there was one last sacrifice that had to be made. America would have to part ways with her shamanic spirit animal. Accompanying her for her whole life, intertwined with her soul and underlying her actions lied the abyssal serpent. But parting ways with such an aspect of her spirit wasn't as simple as saying goodbye. Rather, America's relation to the abyssal serpent evolved into that of a mother as she gave birth to her son Mesmer. After sealing away the serpent within her son, America found herself at her lowest point. But America had faith in the greater will, justifying her actions by telling herself no matter the sacrifice, it would be worth it for the greater good. Finally, America found herself standing atop a tower built on the sacrifices of all those whose lives and dreams were swept away in the storm of her ambition as she took fate into her own hands. With that, America shed the skin of her former self to become the vessel of the greater will, a true God walking the earth. But now, America had to confront the issues of being God and determining the meaning of order. Growing up in nature, America's vision for heaven on earth involved a grand city upon a hill bathed in rays of gold. And following recent events, she was also sure she wanted no more death. So America channeled her newfound powers into creating a glowing tree of life reaching above the clouds, under which she founded her capital city of Leyndell. Further, she removed the concept of death from her world, sealing it away with the only companion she had since the beginning, Malekith. The sealing of death marked the beginning of America's newfound Golden Order. Although a giant glowing tree that healed all those who came near it was enough for many to have faith in America's Golden Order, others held to their own beliefs. So America and her followers would have to find a solution to all those outside of the Golden Order. The most pressing of which were the Fire Giants, who possessed the Flame of Ruin, which posed an immediate threat to her Tree of Life. Thus, America found the strongest warrior of the lands, Godfrey, who she would empower along with his warriors to wage war on the Fire Giants and confine their flame atop the tallest mountain. Heroes who died for her cause would earn the right to be buried at the roots of the tree, and their spirits would be integrated back into the cycle of life. With the flame now secured by America's first Elden Lord, the Golden Order had more room to breathe, and have children. Then came the births of Godwyn, firstborn heir to the Golden Order, and the Horned Twins, Mog and Morgoth. However, America's decision to shun the twins cut far deeper than the irreparable physical damage they caused during birth. The sight of their horns triggered memories of her ascension, namely the butchering of her own people by the Hornsent. Additionally, casting their twin sons in the sewer caused Godfrey immense grief, marking the loss of his warrior spirit. Nevertheless, America's ambition of creating a perfect united order were yet to be realized, and now her Lord Godfrey was too depressed to fight. Accordingly, America banished Godfrey for his weakness to grow stronger in the face of death, only to be rebirthed here once he got himself together. With Godfrey out of the picture, America decided to take matters into her own hands. So she separated a part of herself to create her perfect lord, who would take the name Radagon. Acting through Radagon, America would wage war on the Liurnians since they were students of the stars and cosmos. Logically, the Liurnians were the most likely civilization to have the answers to the universe that America lacked as a shaman, but would need to consider as god. But Radagon was no Godfrey and lost the war to the Liurnians. To make matters worse, Radagon tried retreating to launch a second attack only to be intercepted by their queen Rennala herself on the battlefield. Somewhat embarrassingly, Radagon found himself on the losing end of the war for the second time. But by the grace of God, Rennala, who grew up as a stargazing student buried in her studies, appeared to have a crush on the 10-foot-tall ripped war champion with flowing red locks riding around on a horse shirtless. So Radagon capitalized on the opportunity and proposed marriage to Rennala. Despite the tension created amongst every other Liurnian, Rennala accepted Radagon's proposal, ending the conflict. As such, the very man who just tried to invade twice became king of the Liurnians, and America now had open access to all of their research and resources. To root her order even deeper, Radagon had 3 children with Rennala, Radahn, Rykard, and Ranni. firstborn heir to the Carian throne. I told Marika that I knew Ranni and we were here to take over as god. Marika seemed relieved, but said she always thought it would be her son Miquella who would succeed her. Marika explained Miquella had a natural charm about him. He never even had to fight for his followers. It was as though they were simply attracted to him. Regardless, Marika continued that eventually Radagon began to deviate from their plan. Initially sent over to research the universe, Radagon had shifted his focus to artificially creating a perfect lord to take his place so he could stay with his new family. So now, Marika was put into a position where Godfrey was banished and depressed, her own perfect lord was leaving her, and she seemed to be the only one remaining with the flame of ambition. So Marika fell back to her nature and reached out to her son Mesmer. She directed Mesmer to wage war on the Hornsent for butchering her people and destroying her union with Godfrey, betraying the Hornsent with flames of ruin. After cleansing her world of the Hornsent, Marika veiled the entire area in shadow, suspending it outside of the lands between. Before things could get further out of hand, Marika called back Radagon to unite and become one again. Despite tearing Radagon's family apart, Marika determined upholding the Golden Order was more important. Thus, Marika and Radagon would have another set of twins, Miquella and Melania, both Empyreans that could succeed Marika and lead the Golden Order. But Marika's red-headed stepchild Ranni was not pleased with her father leaving in the name of upholding order. So Ranni orchestrated the Night of the Black Knives to assassinate Marika's golden child Godwyn. Once her children began killing each other, Marika decided things had gotten so bad that she would shatter the Elden Ring and start all over. But the Greater Will had other plans and took her actions as divine transgressions. Consequently, the Greater Will crucified Marika inside the big tree, surrounding her with a mantle of barbs, and has ever since been forcing her to act as the imprisoned vessel of the Elden Ring. Therefore, Marika now offered to travel with me in the form of the Holy Spirit so I can become Elden Lord and free her from her caged divinity. I accepted her guidance, so she told me to seek the fire that she had long ago confined to the highest peak of the tallest mountain which could burn down the thorns. To help, Marika invited me to set up base camp inside a metaphysical safe haven called Round Table Hold, where there was a smith she tasked with forging a god-slaying weapon. But immediately upon my arrival, one of the residents tried mugging me for my medallion half to Miquella's tree. After fighting off my attacker, I demanded answers from the head of the establishment, Gideon Ofnir. Gideon blatantly deflected the issue and instead gave me directions to Latenna, who would know the location of the medallion's other half. So I headed back towards my lake to find Latenna, only to bump into a man named Vare who stopped me to talk about his religion. I gathered that Vare was a follower of Marika's missing son, Lord Mog. Vare proposed that I serve Mog to bring about his coming dynasty. As Ranni's lord, I felt it was my duty to do some reconnaissance to determine if Lord Mog could threaten our plans. So I lied to Vare that I would serve Mog, only for him to test my faith by proposing that I receive an injection of Mog's blood.
What's that frog back there doing?
I was too far in at this point, so I agreed, receiving the power to light my club on fire in the process.
Never forget that feeling of agony, for it is what binds you to Luminary Moog, to all of us. You have the sweetest scream, my...
Once the transfusion was complete, Vare granted me a medal that would transport me into Mog's domain, warning me not to use it until the time was right. So I immediately teleported away before he could stop me. Upon my arrival, I found that my brother frogs must have received their own transfusions and were training to harness the powers. I figured if my brother frogs trust Mog, he must be an ally and safe to leave alone. But before leaving, one of my brother frogs gifted me a more powerful club and even taught me how to use it to summon spirits to help me fight. With that, I set off for Mog's hellscape and journeyed back to my lake, fought through an extensive cave network, and emerged on the other side to find Latenna. Latenna informed me that the medallion's other half was being held in Castle Sol up in the mountains I was already headed towards. Thankfully, Castle Sol was an ally to the frogs and had even sent gifts in the past. Latenna asked to accompany me to head north, but before leaving, she warned me that it was none other than Gideon that had slaughtered our village. So as we set off for the mountains, I explained to Latenna that we had a truce with Gideon for now, but still, we agreed to keep an eye on him. As we made our way through the mountains, Latenna spoke up that Castle Sol was just to the north. But I told her we've got to finish securing the Elden Ring for Ranni before retiring to our promised land. So we continued through the mountains towards the Ember Merrick spoke of, only to encounter a giant carrying around some kind of plate at the peak of the mountain. As I galloped towards him, he tried throwing ice, but I was able to leap over it safely. Given him the size of his toenail, he underestimated how hard I could hit and made the mistake of letting me get into position to start smashing his medial malleolus. After a couple of hits, he dropped down to clutch his ankle, which left him wide open for another crack in the same spot. That dropped him to his knees, but I didn't feel sorry for him, so I kept cracking him in the exact same spot. After sustaining heavy damage, he tried shoulder rolling away from me, but I called in my horse and galloped after him. As I ran him down, he reached into his stomach and started spewing lava all over the place, but I was able to leap off my horse to keep cracking his ankle in the same spot a couple times to drop him again. At this point, his entire leg was completely disabled, so he literally ripped it off and hoisted it into the air as a sacrifice to his god. But this left him wide open for me to run in and club the front of his quad so hard he faceplanted. While he was down, I shoved my club into his chest eyeball a couple times. As he tried getting up, I summoned my horse to step on his arm while I clubbed his hand before moving him to start beating on his other quad. After a couple hits, he tried shoulder rolling away from me again. But as I went to summon my horse to run him down, I accidentally summoned a couple of the boys. R.I.P. the boys. Although the boys got flattened almost immediately, I was able to move back in to smack his thumb. But as I went to swing again, he tried dropping a heavy illegal elbow, so I clubbed his tricep while his arm was down. Unable to hit me himself, he tried conjuring a couple balls of fire at him, so I moved in to keep beating on his quad. Although I was able to bait one fireball to blow up on his groin, I had to take some evasive maneuvers to dodge the remaining fireball. He tried taking advantage of the distance to squish me one last time, but he whiffed, allowing me to circle around on my horse to leap off and smash his hand again. After dodging yet another illegal elbow, I whiffed a swing on his arm and another on his hand as he rolled away to get some distance. But I stayed on him, and this time I landed my hit, and after one last wrist shot, the giant went down. Following the death of the fire giant, I continued to the summit to find the fire Marika spoke about. Just as I reached the peak, Marika appeared as the Holy Spirit again. She was impressed that I would eliminate the last of the giants, saying even Godfrey couldn't bring himself to take out the last one. Regardless, Marika said we would have to part ways in a moment, but that she would explain the final steps to becoming Elden Lord. But first, she said she had to fill me in on a couple details about her ascension to godhood that she left out earlier. Marika explained that she was not the first god, nor the first vessel of the Elden Ring, meaning she had to overthrow the prior god to claim it for herself. So while Marika was working with the Hornsent to make the necessary sacrifices, she sent Malekith off to the existing royal city Farum Azula to assassinate their god queen leader, the Glowmite Queen. But Malekith couldn't just walk in and slay the queen, as she was well guarded in the heart of the capital city. To complicate matters further, the Glowmite Queen was widely regarded as the mother of dragons, and her Elden Lord was a 5-headed dragon known as Dragon Lord Placidusax, the leader of the ancient dragons. But the commoners of the civilization were beasts who worshipped the dragons. Thus, Malekith used his bestial nature to his advantage and disguised himself as one of the beasts, taking on the name of Gurranq. As Gurranq, Malekith went on to ascend the ranks of the clergy, allowing him to get close to the Glowmite Queen herself. Once he was behind enemy lines, Malekith defeated the Glowmite Queen in battle. Afterwards, Marika claimed the Elden Ring for herself and sealed away the aspect of the Glowmite Queen representing death within Malekith's blade. Ever since, Malekith has been hiding undercover from the remaining members of the Glowmite Queen's civilization as Gurranq within their own inner sanctum. So now Marika instructed me to find Malekith so I can unseal death to bring about the end of the Golden Order. Afterwards, she explained that I would then have to confront her back in Lane Dell and take the Elden Ring as she did before. Indeed, Marika warned me that Radagon was still very much a part of her and still thought he could fix everything. But right on time, she said her smith had finished crafting the god-slaying weapon I would need to slay Radagon and handed it over as a parting gift. With that, Marika said it was time to commit a cardinal sin and burn down her tree of life.
She made me go limp.
To do so, Marika said she would have to light her spirit aflame to travel through the branches of the tree and burn it from the inside out. I asked whether that was really necessary, but she assured me if she doesn't burn this vessel, then once I unsealed death, the aspect of the Glowmite Queen that was sealed away would take over and hunt me for eternity. Therefore, we agreed that Marika would burn down the tree with her last flame of ambition, and after I unleashed death, we would meet again in battle. As Marika burned, she gave me one last heads up that she resurrected Godfrey as insurance in case I failed, and with that, she teleported me off to Farum Azula. While I was searching for Malekith, I was confronted by the Glowmite Queen's apostles who tried to gang up on me. To even the playing field, I called in Latenna to back me up. But as the fight commenced, Latenna and I found ourselves joined by an unlikely ally, Bernal. Turns out the Frog Torture Town and the volcano that I fled earlier was led by Ranni's brother Rykard, who also had an interest in ending the Golden Order. Apparently, these apostles had been sniffing around Rykard's church in search of a relic that Ranni gifted him as a backup plan in case I failed. But before the apostles could find the relic, Rykard entrusted it to his strongest champion Bernal to flee the town and trail me to help in the Golden Order. Bernal divulged that apparently Rykard had locked himself in his own chambers to engage in a blasphemous ritual, even going so far as removing his own ribs to accomplish his goals. But word around the manor was that Rykard injured his back in the process and succumbed to his injuries. So by guarding Latina, sneak attacking the apostles while they were focused on my allies, and narrowly avoiding death, we were able to fight our way out of the situation. With the way forward cleared, I continued around Farum Azula until I spotted a suspiciously large beast man in what appeared to be a disguise. As he started hurling boulders and swiping at my legs, I figured this had to be Malekith undercover as Garok. So I tried to dislocate his shoulder, only for him to pivot leap behind me and try swinging on me again. I was able to avoid his attacks and front flip to club the back of his head as he tried throwing rocks at me, but I slipped through and kept swinging. After he missed me with more rocks, he tried hiding his attack behind his cloak, but I saw it coming and rolled under his arm to bash his kneecap. That made him go stiff, allowing me to slip his attack and catch him on the temple. While he was dazed, I cracked him twice more in the same spot. The blunt force trauma caused him to come to his senses and take me seriously. So he decided to unleash his sealed powers, drop the disguise, and fight me as his true form. But he must have been rusty from spending so long in disguise, and started swinging at nothing before leaping through the air only to stab the ground. As he pulled his sword out, I walked behind him to initiate my secret double front flip maneuver to smash his feeble hips. Although he slipped my follow-up, he overestimated my height and swung right over my head. While he was overextended, I obliterated his hip, leaving him vulnerable to a couple wide-open shots square in the jaw. With Malekith taken care of, I unleashed death itself back upon the world. With death unbound, Marika's fire began to engulf her tree of life. So now, the only thing left was to meet Marika back in Leyndell to claim the Elden Ring for Ranni. But as I approached the base of the big tree, I crossed paths with a man who slaughtered my village, Gideon Ofnir. Gideon immediately tried posturing on me, so I smashed my club into his shoulder to throw him off. He tried to get some distance, but I stayed on him and continued to whack him each time he tried striking a pose. Eventually, he challenged me to a drinking competition, but he didn't expect me to down numbing juice. While my body was completely numb, I tanked Gideon's strongest attacks as I moved in to corner him. Once I had him pinned, I launched a double front flip into him, flattening him into the ground for slaughtering my village. Knowing he was in trouble, he tried challenging me to a drinking competition again, but he was all out of juice. Now completely vulnerable, I continued my assault until I avenged my village. With Gideon out of the way, I continued up to the big tree only to find that Godfrey himself had made it back to the capital. But Godfrey wasn't alone. He was accompanied by his regent Siraj, the former leader of the beasts of Farum Azula. Godfrey was not pleased about what I had done to his shunned son Morgoth, and as he faded away in his arms, Godfrey's warrior spirit was returned.
Alas, I am returned. To be granted audience once more.
With that, I now had to defeat a restored Godfrey to claim his title of Elden Lord. Godfrey immediately leapt 30 feet into the air and hurled his axe at me before changing his own trajectory mid-air to hurl himself at me. While he was recovering, I front flipped to blast his tailbone so hard he glided off to kick the ground in an attempt to restore feeling in his legs. After slipping his attacks, I jumped up to smash his shoulder, landing just in time to slip more attacks. Still trying to get feeling back in his legs, Godfrey glided off to kick his leg out a couple times. After whiffing his swing, I was able to smash his knee again, dropping him. While he was down, I clubbed him in the neck a couple times, causing him to start losing control over his own body. While he was immobilized, I launched a double front flip to land 2 brutal groin shots, forcing him to use his axe as a walking stick. So I started going for his knuckles and groin to make him drop his axe. Seeing his lord in such a state, Siraj stepped forward to defend Godfrey. But Godfrey said he had things under control and took out Siraj himself to make a statement. Turns out, Siraj wasn't a backup fighter. He was a limiter in Godfrey's bloodlust for battle. But I wasn't taking chances, so while Godfrey was mid-battle cry, I front flipped into another groin shot, followed by an open shot to the back of his head. While he was dazed, I cracked him in the neck a couple more times, causing him to lose control of his own body again. I kept aiming for his groin, forcing him to assume a fetal position. After I blasted his hip, he nearly killed me by smacking the ground, but I was able to survive and finish him off with one more brutal groin shot. So now, the only thing left to do was enter the big tree to meet God herself and claim the Elden Ring for Ranni. As I entered, I found that Marika spoke true, and Radagon immediately started taking over to defend his throne. So while he was still taking over, I closed the distance with a front flip, aiming for his missing ribs. But once Radagon fully assumed control, he started swinging at me with everything he had left in his partially fractured body. After I slipped multiple of his attacks, he tried to catch me off guard with some God rays before trying to grab a hold of me. But I was able to slip away to crack his tailbone, forcing him to rotate in place and whip his attack, leaving him open for me to completely fracture his tailbone. While he was recovering, I embedded my club directly into his body cavity, knocking him flat on his back. As he got to his feet, I backstepped into a front flip just in time to hop his stomp and club his head. With that, Radagon leapt into the air to try and smash me, but I was able to roll out of the way and flip into another headshot. For nearly killing me by dodging my flip, I beat him to the punch, dropping Radagon. But as he fell, the Elden Ring inside of him transformed into a cosmic beast, the manifestation of the greater will itself. The beast reached out towards Radagon's body, reducing him to his nature, the Sword of God. Before I could attack, the beast transported us away into a more favorable terrain for it to navigate, a metaphysical realm at the roots of the Erd Tree. Wasting no time, I ran in to start blasting its cosmic body with everything I had, causing it to start puking grace all over the place. But I was able to circle out of the way and land a couple more solid shots to its metaphysical kidney. While it was debilitated, I repositioned to keep blasting body shots with all of my strength, causing a rift to open in its stomach. After catching another shot in the neck, the beast tried swimming away, so I immediately summoned my horse to run it down. As I caught up, the beast tried swiping my legs out from under me, but I was able to slip its attacks to keep blasting body shots. Before I could finish it off, it tried swimming away again before re-engaging with another swing. Sensing it was about to run again, I simply juiced up for our next engagement. Sure enough, the beast tried swiping my legs again, leaving it open for another flip. After one more chase sequence, I was able to dodge its final swings and front flip into its body twice more, slaying the cosmic beast. Just as Ranni promised, she found her own meaning of order and now reappeared to bring about a new age. Ranni believed that the key flaw in the Golden Order was God's existence on Earth. As such, she claimed the world would be better if people couldn't clearly see, feel, believe in, and touch the Order as they could now. So instead, Ranni decided she would act as God removed from the world, setting off into the sky to embark on a journey of solitude and darkness for the greater good. Despite the terms of our metaphysical long-distance high-commitment relationship, I agreed to consort with Ranni to become her Elden Lord, where I would remain in the lands to physically uphold her order. So Ranni deemed me her consort eternal, Lord Frog, the Flood. As Ranni disappeared in the night sky, the only thing left for me to do was help Latinna fulfill her purpose and retire to the peaceful promised land of Miquella's Haligtree. So Latinna and I journeyed back into the mountains to grab the medallion from our allies in Castle Sol, but we arrived to find a horrifying scene. Our fellow frogs were being held hostage, so we rushed through the castle to find out who was responsible. We eventually found the commander, Niall, who immediately called his guards to try and take my medallion. I was able to fight my way past his guards, but as I did so, I revealed that I wasn't an ordinary frog. So the commander decided it was time to take things serious and started whirlwinding his staff over his head as an intimidation tactic. But then we realized he was actually kicking up a snowstorm to generate a static charge from the colliding snow particles. The ruthless commander proceeded to leap through the air and axe-kick paraplegic Latinna. So I rushed in to grab his attention, baiting the commander to target me with the same axe kick he just used to flatten Latinna. Except I was able to roll out of the way as I started to front flip into the commander, slipping his counter and knocking him to his knees. Now I began to demand answers why he was holding the frogs hostage. The commander explained he was only following orders and that his force was hired by the master of Castle Sol to retrieve the medallion at all costs. As he got to his feet, he started winding up for the same axe kick maneuver, but Latinna kept shooting straight while I continued to evade his attacks. Once he figured he couldn't touch me, he turned his attention back to paraplegic Latinna. As I maintained my distance to avoid the static discharge of the commander's attacks, Latinna managed to avoid an attack without moving. But the commander continued to ruthlessly beat on Latinna, sending another axe kick to pin her in the corner. While I bided my time for an opening to jump in, Latinna continued eating shots. But after seeing Latinna get slashed and axe kicked, I decided I had to do something, so I ran in to help only to get tased. However, I was able to buy Latinna enough time to eliminate the commander. After Latinna helped me up, she asked the other frog spirits around the castle what had happened, and gathered that Miquella himself had been here. Further, Miquella had reached an agreement with Castle Sol that if they could resurrect his brother Godwyn, then they would be granted access to his promised land. As a good faith gesture, Miquella granted Castle Sol half of the medallion, with the other half to be granted upon Godwyn's return. So Castle Sol began their prayers to bring about an eclipse to restore Godwyn's soul to his body. But the eclipse never came, as Ranni's brother Donnie was holding the stars in place. So Castle Sol hired the services of Commander Niall, who sent a battalion led by his brother Commander O'Neill south to defeat Donnie. Meanwhile, Niall devised a plan to retrieve the other half of the medallion by force. Word had spread that the frogs held the remaining half, so Niall lured them to Castle Sol with gifts, only to hold them hostage to force the frogs to turn over the medallion. Although the commander was unsuccessful in his mission, I was able to retrieve the remaining medallion half, pocketing it as we set off towards the secret passage of Miquella's Haligtree. After presenting the medallion, Lieutenant and I found ourselves traversing the icy winds of Canada, eventually reaching a town of frogs. We gathered that Miquella had entrusted them with guiding more frogs to the Haligtree and protecting the entrance from intruders. So Lieutenant decided she would stay in the frog town to fulfill her purpose of birthing more frogs to guard our promised land, while I set off to peacefully retire at Miquella's Haligtree. But upon my arrival, I found the opposite of a peaceful scene. Frogs that made it to the tree were encased in some sort of cocoons, appearing to have been entirely drained of life. So I sought answers from the lead frog Loretta, who immediately tried subduing me. But I wasn't going down without a fight and began front flipping into her to try and knock some sense into her. But she appeared to be in some sort of trance and proceeded to levitate into the air to shoot at me. I was able to slip her attacks to club her horse before shoulder rolling underneath her halberd to drop her. After narrowly avoiding her protective magic, I continued my assault as I tried snapping her out of the trance. Despite my efforts, she kept attacking, forcing me to defend myself, realizing this fight would be to the death. So I tried to make it quick, dropping her again to club the back of her head as hard as possible. My attacks forced her to amp things up with all she had left, as she put all her might into her halberd trying to match my attacks. Yet she was unable to keep up the pace, and after narrowly avoiding her final swing, she eventually fell under the weight of my club. With the way forward clear, I descended the Haligtree only to find even more frogs in cocoons, drained of life. Realizing this was no promised land, I decided retirement would have to wait until I got to the bottom of this situation. So I continued deeper in search of Miquella, eventually making it to the roots where I met his twin Melania, the same half-sister of Ronnie and Donnie who inflicted him with brain rot. Melania appeared to be in a state of half-consciousness, identifying herself only as the Blade of Miquella.
And I have never known defeat.
God damn, okay. Understanding Melania's fearsome reputation, I decided it was time to drop the training rates to pick up some answers. So I ran into Clubber before she could react, and after she whiffed her attack, I cracked her back so hard she jumped away to reevaluate her tactics. When she was ready, she re-engaged with a tornado kick. I slipped and answered with a whack, causing her to revert back to trying to cut me with her sword. I continued to slip all of her attempts to maim me until I found an opening to strike. But before I could get a hold of her, she found her footing and leapt into the air. After sniffing her feet, I took off rolling through the meadow while she unleashed a flurry of attacks, narrowly missing me as I rolled through the grass. Once she finished, I jumped in to club her over the head, before catching her again as she tried repositioning. As she tried cutting me again, I fell into a backward shoulder roll to kick up some water, letting me slip her sword and knock the wind out of me. While she was winded, I proceeded to dunk her in the water to wake her up as I demanded that she explain what's going on. Melania explained that following the failed resurrection of their brother Godwin at Castle Sol, Miquella sought to found his own order. To do so, Miquella was even willing to sacrifice himself to create a better world where soulless existence was an impossibility. Thus, Miquella planted the seed to his new world and watered it with his own divine blood, creating the Haligtree. But to complicate matters, both Melania and Miquella suffered from their own curses as a result of being born from a single god. Miquella's curse was eternal youth, while Melania's curse was a flesh-consuming disease known as scarlet rot. Nevertheless, Melania shared that Miquella was able to use his own youthful divine blood to craft a needle which would halt the progression of her disease. With her disease now under control, Melania devoted herself to fight for Miquella's dream, becoming the Blade of Miquella. As the Haligtree grew, Miquella invited all who were shunned outcasts under America's Golden Order to share in his dream of a gentle, peaceful world. However, Miquella's cursed baby blood was insufficient to grow a tree of life alone. So, joining Miquella's perfect dream world meant leaving behind the current world. Indeed, the Haligtree and, by extension, the collective dream would be fueled by the blood of the followers who chose to sacrifice themselves for Miquella's dream. But watching his followers die for his dream caused Miquella immense grief, leading him to question why he had to watch everyone he cared for die in front of him while he remained powerless in his baby body. So Miquella devised a plan to claim the Elden Ring itself and become God, so he would have the power to make his dream a reality. But as God, Miquella would need a lord to uphold his order, so he chose the mightiest of the demigods, the embodiment of war itself, Radahn. Understandably, Radahn wasn't readily on board with consorting with his half-brother, saying, "Over my dead body." So the two made a vow that if Miquella granted Radahn an honorable warrior's death in combat, he would serve him with all of his soul. Thus, Miquella crafted a sword of pure gold from his own blood for his little sister Malenia, who he sent to grant Radahn death and fulfill their part of the vow. Fighting for Miquella's dream, Malenia was forced to part with her pride itself and release the power of her curse to match Radahn in combat. Malenia was able to severely weaken Radahn and rot his brain away, resulting in the mentally impaired Donnie I sent to the Shadow Realm earlier, but the two ultimately reached a stalemate. Although one of Malenia's soldiers was able to carry her all the way back to the Haligtree, when she returned, Miquella had set off himself. Malenia explained that Miquella, like his mother, had a second half, known as Saint Trina. As Saint Trina, Miquella would journey around the lands, bringing his dream to his followers. Presumably still away on one such journey, Malenia had since been dreaming of Miquella's return. Listening to Malenia's story caused me to become lost in thought, considering the irony of how Miquella's intent of wanting to preserve peace had initiated war. When I came to, I realized I had been holding Malenia underwater for longer than I intended. Regardless, I set my sights on finding Miquella and preventing his ascension into a god who would rival Ranni. So I figured my best bet would be asking my ally Mog to dispatch our frog brothers to find Miquella.
Wait.
But just as I was leaving, Malenia caught a second wind, and her near-death experience activated the rod in her body as she arose to defend Miquella's dream. So I front-flipped into her, flattening her back on the ground. But she was quick to levitate back into the air, and as she began to unleash rot all over the pond, I had the realization that her rot was the same that had been sinking my homeland. As if fate itself had aligned, I now had the opportunity to hold her accountable for the destruction of my lake. So after some evasive maneuvers, I clubbed her over the head as she leapt back into the air to attack me from above. But while she was fighting for the dream of peace, I was fighting for the dream of reality. Rather than rolling over and dying to exist in a false reality of play pretend, I was here to fight on behalf of the reality of imperfection. As a champion of the frogs, it was my duty to uphold our order, even if that meant taking on the gods with nothing but a big club. And although I didn't have the ability to harness the cycle of decay and rebirth, I had spent my entire journey fostering my flame of ambition to struggle along, no matter the imbalance of power. So I gripped my club and ran back in to continue the struggle, launching into a double front flip to flatten her again. But this time, she got up and roundhoused me in the arm so hard I almost died, reminding me I was still just a frog with a big stick. So after collecting myself, I backpedaled to get some distance. She tried chasing me down with the same roundhouse, but this time I slipped and countered before shoulder rolling back into the pond, anticipating one final engagement. After a final stare down, she made the first move, advancing with the last of her strength, but she came up just short and was drowned by the flood.
Extraordinary.
Drown in my pond. With Malenia taken care of, I set off back to Lord Mog's hellscape underneath Caelid so we could search for Miquella. But upon my arrival, I found a giant version of the frog cocoons. As I approached to inspect, a 10-foot-long withered arm fell down and started dripping blood. From the pool of blood, Lord Mog emerged to greet me, identifying the occupant of the cocoon to be Miquella himself. Mog revealed that ever since I took on his blood, he had been silently observing the path I walked to become the Elden Lord. Further, my rise to Elden Lord with Ranni inspired him to follow in my footsteps, and he already found his own four-armed Empyrean to raise to godhood in Miquella. However, Mog viewed the long-distance high-commitment relationship that I shared with Ranni was flawed, so he decided to have a low-commitment cohabitating relationship with Miquella. Indeed, Mog had taken up residence inside of Miquella's husk, becoming of a single flesh, ritualistically united in blood as a vessel for their cosmic entity, the Mother of Truth. Moreover, Mog had observed Ranni's sacrifice of her own flesh to become a god and attempted to match her sacrifice using the blood of the fallen soldiers from the wars in Caelid above. Luckily, it appeared that the mass sacrifice was insufficient, as Mog felt no more powerful than before. But unfortunately, Mog determined that the missing piece was usurping the prior god and current Elden Lord, and I had just walked directly into the Devil's domain. So Mog immediately opened a dimensional rift to try and burn me with the fiery blood of his god. But I kept my distance, and after he tried crushing me with his trident, I smashed his knuckles. Although Mog maintained his grip, he left himself open for a smack that forced him to reevaluate his attack plan. So then he tried to skewer me, letting me crack his tailbone so hard he started speaking Latin. Before he could recover, I scraped his hip and made him bleed. He tried to get me back, so I circled around to crack his hip again, dropping him. While he was down, I followed up with a couple brutal body shots, trying to open another wound. As he got up, I flipped into a groin shot, which did the trick, and with all the blood loss, he started counting out loud just to stay conscious. But as I kept scraping his hip, I realized he wasn't just counting. He was calling out to his god to steal my frog blood to heal his wounds and empower himself. Once I patched my wounds, I kept scraping at his hip wound and then groin wound before shoulder rolling around on the floor to slip underneath his attacks as I spin attacked his groin again. Now he was starting to bleed everywhere, so I pitched him away onto the floor and immediately flipped after him and continued rolling around on the floor as he flung his own fiery blood all over the place. Now he was on the back foot, but he fell for the flinch check and made the mistake of making the first move, trying to smash me only to overextend and catch another shot in the tailbone. He quickly turned, attempting to incinerate me one last time, but I braved the hellfire and looked the devil eye to eye as I sent him directly to the Shadow Realm. After neutralizing the threat of Mog's dynasty, I approached Miquella's withered body to see whether he was still alive. But as I reached out to loot him, I was transported away to another realm. Confused regarding the nature of this realm, I headed towards the giant dark castle on the horizon for answers. But on the way, I found myself venturing through a village, only to realize that this is where Marika made the sacrifice of her own people. As if a fog had been lifted, I realized I had entered the realm Marika had veiled in shadow. Now it became clear that Miquella must not have died a true death, and the threat of his rise to godhood was still present. But even though Miquella had already sacrificed his own flesh to the Haligtree and sacrificed his followers as an offering to the Mother of Truth, I figured at least I had stopped him from acquiring a lord by slaying Radahn and Mog and his sword Malenia. While I was lost in thought, I found I had wandered into the depths of the giant dark castle where I bumped into the former commander of Lord Mog's forces, who introduced himself as Ansbach. I kept to myself that I had slain Lord Mog, and Ansbach said that he too had been seeking answers regarding Miquella. Interestingly, Ansbach explained that Mog was enchanted by Miquella, and by extension, his prior actions were taken in accordance with Miquella's will. Concerningly, however, after someone slayed Lord Mog, his body was taken to Miquella by a group of his followers. Further, Ansbach shared his findings that Miquella had been divesting himself of his humanity to sever his birthright and alter his fate as a child of the Golden Order. Now free of his corporeal form, Miquella was bound for the divine gate that had birthed a god, namely Marika. But we had a major problem. The divine gate was atop a tower known as Anir Lim, which was shrouded in impenetrable thorns of shadow, which barred us mortals from following Miquella to put a stop to his ascension. Yet there was still hope, as the thorns were being projected by a sealing tree on the other end of the nearby ruins. And luckily for us, the leader of this very castle held all the power we would need to burn the sealing tree and thorns away. So I ascended the castle to ask for help, where I found myself in a pitch-black, windowless chamber.
Mongrel intruder.
In the darkness, I was met by none other than Messmer, Marika's son, who she had instructed to annihilate the Hornsent. Messmer was not pleased that Marika guided a common frog to become Elden Lord, while he was abandoned and left veiled here in perpetuity. So he lunged across the room to try and engulf me in flame. But now he was in my clubbing range, but that also meant I was in range for him to try and catch me on fire with his flaming spear, only to eat a shot to his jaw. While he was dazed, I repeatedly shoulder rolled into his shins to back him into a railing. Now that I had him where I wanted him, I demanded to know where we are. Messmer explained that this realm of shadow coexists with the lands between and functions as a purgatory for souls to pass through for purification. As such, Messmer has been following his mother's orders ever since the crusades against the Hornsent, presiding over purgatory and suppressing his serpentine nature. But backed against a wall and under attack by Lord Frog, he was forced to slither out just to stay alive. Now he was pulling out all the stops and showed why he was known as the Impaler, singeing me, but he failed to anticipate I would stand in place through the assault. After another crack, I continued rolling around on the floor underneath his flames until I found an opening to catch him mid-swing. While he was down, I questioned how many years he had been here in purgatory, how long he planned to wait for his mother's permission to leave behind this self-imposed prison sentence and make something of himself. Whether he intends to perpetually sit here brooding in the darkness, stroking his snake, passively waiting for someone else to give him purpose, living his life solely in service of his mother. That must have struck a chord, and Messmer decided now was the time to become his own man. So Messmer broke the seal his mother placed upon him at birth, unleashing the abyssal serpent within, fueled by a burning hatred for the monster he had become. Messmer began to summon forth his God-given fire he had been dampening in the name of upholding order. But the lands were under new management, and Lord Frog had been fanning his flame of ambition this entire journey. So I clubbed him across the face, and Messmer took off trying to assault me again. But he never learned that I would stand in place and completely whiffed his attacks. Now on his last leg, Mesmer resorted to serpentine maneuvers, but in his newly blinded state, he was unable to keep up with my erratic shoulder rolling. So I kept smothering him by rolling on his feet. After nearly getting skewered, I leapt up for a bonk so hard he liquefied, only to re-emerge from the abyss to try and bite me. I panicked and rolled into his snout and whiffed my follow-up, giving him time to try and swallow me whole one last time. But Mesmer hesitated, as he always had, and consequently fell before ever leaving the castle in which he was born, cursing and blaming his mother for his failed existence, amounting only to a sacrifice. So I decided to carry Mesmer's all-powerful flame and actually do something with it, as I set off to burn the thorns around the Divine Gate and put a stop to Miquella's ascension. But Ansbach forgot to mention that to get to the sealing tree, I had to go through a church that Mesmer had raised on his crusades. On top of that, the church was devoted to the worship of the Scarlet Rod, and one of its devout followers, Romina, had survived the crusades by corrupting herself with the twisted divine element of Rod. Remembering the damage the rot caused to my homeland, I had no issue holding the giant centipede woman accountable. So after she swept me across the room, I folded her over into position to club what appeared to be an attachment point to try splitting her off from the rest of her centipede body. But her exoskeleton was harder than I anticipated, and she coiled up and started rolling around the room. So I started rolling back and went back in to keep trying to squish her with all of my might. After folding her again, I kept ripping shots on her attachment point. But then I noticed something glowing on the other side of the room. So I immediately sprinted away like a moth as Romina flew up in the air to call upon a swarm of butterflies to attack me. So I started zerking my club, which instigated Romina to chase me down herself to put a stop to my antics. But now she was back in clubbing range, and after being swept across the room again and narrowly avoiding being squished, I leapt up and folded her again. Now I knew she had to be feeling the damage, so I kept ripping shots, trying to split her off for good. Although she held on, she was getting desperate and started trying to whack me with her pole blade to get me off her. But I stuck to her like glue and whacked her right back, clearing the way forward to burn the sealing tree, preventing me from reaching Miquella. With that, I began my final ascent to a near limb to put a stop to Miquella's ascension to true godhood.
Shout out, Lieutenant. Sorry, Lieutenant.
So I sprinted all the way up the tower until I reached a final purification chamber, where I was stopped by Miquella's top 1 ranked competitive glazer, his most devout follower, Needle Knight Letta. Unlike Miquella's other followers who were tricked into service, Letta followed Miquella by her own volition, with no need of his charms or enchantments. So seeing that I was here to put a stop to Miquella's plans, Letta called in her allies, instigating a team brawl as I called in Wide Matan and Latina to level the playing field. Despite their best efforts, I kept front flipping to flatten them into position for Latina to turn them into pincushions. After painting the entire room with their blood, we eventually came out on top, clearing the way forward towards Miquella. So I ascended to the top of the tower, only to be met with a familiar face. Ronnie's brother Donnie was back. But this time, he was not suffering from brain rot and appeared to be in prime condition. Suddenly, I heard an omnipotent voice as Miquella thanked me for my deeds, divulging that he had orchestrated this ascension since the beginning. Indeed, ever since the two vowed that upon the grant of an honorable warrior's death, Radahn would devote his soul to Miquella's dream, everything has been leading to this moment. Miquella explained that when he halted Malenia's rot with his own blood, he also charmed her to act as his sword, who he sent to slay Radahn. Even though Malenia couldn't best Radahn, she was able to severely weaken him using her sword crafted from Miquella's enchanting blood. So to finish the job, Miquella distributed the medallions to Castle Sol and the Frogs, knowingly breeding conflict amongst his own followers, all to facilitate the death of Radahn. Miquella knew that since Radahn was halting the stars, both Castle Sol and the Frogs had an interest in slaying Radahn to resume their movement. In Castle Sol's case, they had the strongest independent military force in the lands, and Radahn was halting an eclipse, their symbol of worship. As for the Frogs, I was created to become Ronnie's consort, whose fate was being halted by Radahn. As it turns out, I was the one to complete the vow, all while charmed with the idea of retiring to Miquella's peaceful tree. But Miquella's god tree was only a partial realization of his true ambition of creating his own utopia in the form of an eternal reverie. Indeed, the god tree was limited by Miquella's cursed baby blood, requiring the charmed outcast followers to sacrifice themselves to share in the collective dream. So Miquella set off to defy his fate of eternal youth by charming the devil himself to unite in flesh and blood, initiating a mass sacrifice ritual in the name of the Mother of Truth so that he could breach reality and enter the Shadow Realm. Once Miquella was in the Shadow Realm, he was reunited with Radahn's soul, but now had the issue of finding a physical vessel in which to reincarnate Radahn as his lord. But Miquella also foresaw that the lands between would get word of Mog's coming dynasty and put a stop to his plans of creating hell on earth. So after I sent Mog to the Shadow Realm, Miquella had his glazers bring the devil's carcass to him as the vessel for the soul of war. However, such an incarnation ceremony required a far more powerful sacrifice than even his own humanity. Yet Miquella said I had already completed the necessary requirements for him as I trailed him by sacrificing all of the demigods and finally his closest followers just moments ago. So guided by the hand of God along this entire journey, I now found myself in purgatory, face to face with the newest god's perfect creation. I figured Lord Frog's created the problem, Lord Frog will issue the solution. So I dropped the training weights and gripped my club as Radahn closed the distance. I immediately started bashing his kneecaps, causing him to try stomping on me, but being the height of his shins had its own advantages. So I played to my strengths and kept low, and when the time was right, I cracked his other knee. After slipping his stab and rolling under his slash, I went for his quad. He responded with a chop, but I continued rolling around on the floor to evade his attacks until I found an opening to club the back of his weakened knee. So he tried stomping me again, but I was familiar with his combo and kept slipping between his swords as I gripped my club with both hands to wind up for another heavy knee shot. This forced him to take the weight off his legs as he flew away to try and hurl some boulders at me. As a frog, I lacked the ability to fly, so I resorted to psychological warfare, turning my back as I zerked my club. Now, it was on, so he started going for my neck, so I rolled in to slam him with a groin shot. Like a built-in reset button, he mindlessly tried to catch me with the same combo that I had evaded twice before, allowing me to prepare for another brutal knee shot. But this time, I got him good, forcing him to run it off as he shouted in pain. So I turned to zerk my club before he could recover, forcing him to re-engage while his legs were still weak. After catching his knee again, I continued my assault by rolling around behind him to keep laying into the same leg, forcing him to run it off again, only to throw my flip attack against me. As punishment for copying my frog style, I rolled across to spin attack his opposite knee, dropping him. Yet our battle seemed to awaken the essence of war within Radahn's soul, elevating his strength even higher. But the rise in power also must have awoken something in Miquella and led him to manifest in our plane of existence.
Lord Brother. At long last you are returned. Tarnished one. Aspiring Lord of the Old Order. If you have known sin, if you grieve for this world, then yield the path forward to us. To I, Miquella, and my promised consort, Radahn.
But even Miquella's perfect creation had its flaws and still bore the burden of his masculinity. Now it was time to give Radahn the honorable warrior's death he always desired, as we engaged in mutual combat to the death. However, I was still but a frog up against all the power of a god and couldn't afford to take an attack. For if I were to be defeated, it would mean more than the death of a single frog. Rather, my death would mark the end of the world, as Miquella would go on to impose his dream of peace and tranquility on all of humanity. So I rolled on with both hands gripping my club, determined to show God the flaws in his judgment. Indeed, what Miquella failed to understand was that struggle is an inherent component of reality. To continue fighting despite the odds builds a strength that cannot be given by a god. So I gave my thanks to God for guiding me through the challenges that granted me the strength to overcome any obstacle. But Judgment Day had arrived, and God had sent her own soldier in the body of a frog, in the walking incarnation of the Flood. In service of a higher purpose, I was sent to exhibit the arrogance of the fallen angel who had flown too close to the sun, that sought to defy fate and rival divinity. More than a frog with a big club, now stood a frog with two big clubs to represent a cautionary tale, a warning that intellectual superiority without humility can become a form of spiritual corruption. Although his complex plane of ascension to godhood was highly intelligent, his arrogance made him a fool in a spiritual sense, for his intelligence was not coupled with the wisdom to foresee the consequences of his actions. In creating a perfect lord to fight for his dream, God had allowed this common frog to live his dream. For all this frog wanted was simply a fight against the mightiest adversary, who would push him to the edge of his limits so that he may go beyond.
My heart is about to explode out of my chest. I gotta sit down. I'm already sitting. I'm already sitting.